And when I saw the title of the seminar, and I realized that I don't know, I'm not an expert on reading, and there will be so many experts on reading, I decided to refer more to the other side of to the other part of the title, to refer more to disadvantaged communities in my writing. How to construct hope in children's literature is what I would like to talk about. Writing for children carries a wish to construct a humane vision, to imagine a world that carries hope. It is this very challenge that I find so appealing, and that's why I write for children. I hope that the stories I write can encourage my young readers to find consolation and place for themselves in a world that is not always inclusive and sympathetic, especially to those who experience the reality of belonging to disadvantaged communities. This does not mean the stories I write are neutralized from anxieties, fears, and difficulties. On the contrary, the stories are meant to give children the opportunity to cope with all these in the framework of fiction, removed from their day-to-day experience in the real world. Many of my stories are inhabited by creatures that generate fear and anxiety, such as demons, witches, and the like, characters that originate from folk tales that have been told and retold in order to illustrate and express those basic feelings, and at the same time demonstrate how one can overcome them, as for instance in the following story about a girl who is afraid of the dark. This book is called מסיבה של פחדנים, or Cowardly Monsters, and I'll read a short passage from it, a translated passage. At night, when Daddy put me to bed and said good night, I asked him to stay just a little longer and to check that there's no one underneath my bed. Daddy looked and said, "There's no one there, sweetie. Go to sleep. It's late." He turned off the lights and left. I stayed alone in the darkness, hid myself under the blanket, but the darkness crept inside. I wanted to call Daddy again, but it began before I had a chance. The first one to come out was the darkness that lived under my bed. Then, on its tiptoes, came the darkness that lived behind the curtain, and then the darkness that lived inside the drawer rolled down to the floor and called, "Yaba." After that, with its big belly, the darkness that lived inside the wardrobe got out and called out, "Yababa." From under the floor, like a mountain, rose a giant darkness and yelled, "Yababa bidibim da da." From my shoes, two darknesses emerged and screamed, "Yababa bidibim da da, yabo bim bidibim dim dim." Later in the story, the girl finds out that the monsters are afraid of her. So they make a party. So they make a party, jump on the bed until dawn when the monsters disappear. Contemporary children live in a world that presents many threats and anxieties. The wicked witch, the evil demon, and monsters enable writers to concretize all these, as well as to offer an opportunity for relief and liberation through the reading experience. Folk literature has always done that. It has been telling stories through filters of many different cultures, yet it crosses boundaries between cultures. Folk heroes encounter major existential questions, risks, obstacles, and are always able to fulfill their aspirations, find solutions to their distress at the end of the story. For example, the tale of Rapunzel, mostly known by its grim version, tells of a girl who is imprisoned by a witch at the top of a tower and then expelled to the wilderness. Whoops. This is it. Here's an illustration from my adaptation of Rapunzel, which I called Rimon. Rimon is a pomegranate in Hebrew, a more local fruit, as the adaptation is set in a more local background. Finally, after much suffering, Rimon reunites with her love after a long journey of toil and tribulations, just like Cinderella, who is humiliated by her jealous sisters, but wins the prince. And like an earlier version of the same theme, Psyche from Amor and Psyche in the Greek mythology. All these characters, and note that I've chosen female characters to emphasize my argument, begin in a weak position and end as winners. They're thrown into the desert of loneliness and hardship, where they gain their autonomy. I would like to show you a sequence from Amor and Psyche. This is my adaptation of the myth. Following the prophecy of Apollo, Psyche's mother dresses her with a black wedding gown and a dark veil. She is to be led to her wedding on an unknown bridegroom, whom we know is Amor, or Cupid, the god of love. In a procession that looks like a funeral, in a moonless dark night, to the dim light of torches and the sound of lamentations and wails, Psyche is left alone on the stark cliff where she awaits her doom. After many strenuous trials, she unites with Amor, her love. I find this genre of stories, myth, folk tales, or Märchen in the German term, a great source of inspiration. I borrow themes, characters, and sometimes whole stories. I have great faith in them because they tell us about human experience known to everyone, regardless of their origin, thus creating a wide spectrum wherein all human beings share similar challenges and dreams. Here's another of my adopted folk tales. This is where they unite. Now you can meet one of the pajamas books that you've been told about. This is one of the pajamas books, pajamas project. This story is based on an Ethiopian folk tale. But before I tell you the story, I would like to tell you the story behind the story. A few years ago, in one of my visits to schools, I visit many schools during the year all over the country, as part of a project of Ministry of Education titled Meet the Author, I was asked by a group of children to write a story about them. The school was in a very deprived neighborhood in Beersheba. The kids came from very problematic background of great poverty. And I was very moved by the request. Something in my encounter with them moved me. The day after, I called the principal and I said, I would like to come and give a writing workshop in the school for the whole year. And at the end, we'll publish a book written by the children about the children. Because I didn't know much about them and I couldn't write a story about them. And so I wanted them to write about themselves. And the book, and I have to show you the children. These are the children of my workshop. And a book was indeed published at the end of the year. It's called בעיניים שלנו. Through our eyes. This was probably one of my favorite projects, most dialogical project. I felt I learned as much as I taught. Some of the children brought folk tales that they had heard at home. So did Yashitu Amsalo. I want to show you who is Yashitu Amsalo. It's this girl here. From Ethiopia, who told me a story that her mother had told her. It is her story that I have adapted, and of course I gave her credit. And this is the book that Pijama published, Sifrat Pijama published. The story is about Mr. Minasseh, who always wore the same pair of shoes in his old country. He wore them all the way to the new country. Then he decided to buy a new pair and get rid of the old ones. But since everyone knew him by his old shoes, they kept bringing them back to him, no matter how far he tried to throw them. He then realized that one cannot get rid of one's past and memories, and he decided to keep them and wear them sometimes. Just to make the point, just to prove the point that I made, folk tales are shared human experiences. You find them in many versions in different countries, cross cultures and cross generations, and that's why I have such a fondness of them. This is also an example of how stories can grow out of suppressed culture into a dominant one, and brought into the dominant one, which is parallel to the process that had taken place from folk and oral literature into the canon. The issues raised in this Ethiopian folktale are relevant to Israeli society at large. It doesn't only deal with immigration, it also deals with memory, past, and so on. I won't go into all this. Some of my other books, well, I must say that not all my books are adaptations of folktales, but I'm concentrating on these books now in this talk. Some other books are also adaptations of other stories from other cultures, as well as revised tales from Hasidic and Jewish sources, or written in an attempt to bring voices of the underclass, the disadvantaged, into the canon. Stories can offer a positive sense of belonging to a particular cultural background, together with an awareness of a much larger framework of all humankind to which we all belong and with whom we share similar feelings, as we can always demonstrate with different versions of folktales. Folktales are always singular as well as universal, in that they show how everyone struggles with similar questions in different contexts. In a project that I've recently been involved with, I was asked to contribute stories to a bilingual anthology in Hebrew and Arabic that was initiated in order to introduce Jewish, Muslim, and Christian holidays to both Hebrew and Arabic readers. I based my stories on themes of folk tales that I found both in Arab and Jewish sources, so that the cultural and religious differences were presented along similar and common experiences. One of my challenges in writing is to create a dialogue between cultures and people. Such is another one of my folktale-based books. It is a free adaptation of an Arab folktale that was told to me by a friend of mine, Abir Haddad, with whom I was working on a play for children. I wanted one of the characters to tell a story. And Abir came up with a story she had heard as a child. It became part of the play, and later I adapted it into a book. The story is about a village that dwells in fear because of a rule that lives on the mountain. They never go out, never laugh. Everything in the village turns gray and miserable, even the trees and flowers, until one day a brave boy becomes fed up and decides to go up to the mountain to encounter the rule. Everyone in the village tells him not to go, to come back as the rule is so dangerous. But he doesn't decline. When he reaches the mountain, he finds the rule hiding inside a cave in fear of him and of the people living in the village. Once they both realize that the other one is not what they had expected, they dance on top of the mountain. When the people of the village see them, livelihood is brought back to the gray, dilapidated village, and at once everything turns colorful. I'll show you this is the rule. A few years ago, I told the story to children in Sderot. Sderot, which is close to Gaza. And the children, and the children said, the story is about us and Gaza. No, it works both sides. It works both sides. It's not, no, I wouldn't say that. No. They did. We had a conversation about it, and of course they didn't. That everyone thinks about the other, you know. This is the threat. Another important aspect of the genre of folktales is that it makes room for many different voices, not only of kings, queens, and rulers, but also of simple and poor people, the ruled and the weakened. They allow children not only to identify with the underprivileged, but also to be reassured that one can overcome overpowering threats and resist them, even if one is small, weak, and different. Here is another story, another one of Pajama's story. It's called Tochal Meil Tochal, a very honorable quote. How am I doing with time? Tochal Meil Tochal. I have
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So I'll skip the story. It just tells of a poor man who is never respected, but once he gets a new elegant coat, everybody respects him, but he attributes the respect to the coat and not to himself. I'll skip that. It is, again, these stories can be found everywhere. All these stories, in folk research, you find versions of the same story in all cultures. In my adaptation of folktales, I try to present the wisdom and deep insight folded within them in contemporary and relevant language and images. Language is yet another major concern in writing for children, as it is the mode of paving the way to the hearts of the readers and mediating the ideas and messages embedded in the story. Therefore, I try to use language in a playful way. Here is an example in a story which is not really a folktale, but it has some elements. If you like, we can find in them. It's called 5 Wacky Witches. It's probably my most popular book. It's called 5 מכשפות הלכו לטייל, which later I developed into a series that using the same characters to teach. Chava Tuval was the advisor of the series to teach Shudu, Zaza. Just to give you an idea of what I mean by the playful language, I'll read a short passage. 5 wacky witches went walking alone on high roads and by roads. They roared out a song with rickety fingers and boils on their toes. They hopped and they croaked like a band of horse toads. Pradeep, 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 pradu, slugs and bugs, and how do you do? No, it's been published in English. It was included in an anthology of the best children's books in the world, published by Abrams in New York. So I have a good translation of this. Yeah, these witches don't eat children, but cream cakes. Their witchcraft is expressed in their ability to walk on ceilings and in and out of TV screens. but also get stuck in escalators. They mark the borderline between legitimate and illegitimate normative and unnormative behavior, and yet at the end of the day, they take a shower, put on their pajamas, and go to bed like normative children. The playful and humorous language I use, that is sometimes rhythmic and nonsensical, is meant to create a sense of freedom. Breaking the rules of language serves the childish need to examine borders, conventions, and game playing. By playing with the rules of language and the rules of reality, children can gain a sense of control and liberation. In the story about the cowardly monsters I mentioned before, besides the use of rhythmic, nonsensical language, bidi-bim, bidi-bam, there's also a reverse of roles. The monsters turn out to be afraid of the heroine. The same thing happens in the story about the Rule, who hides inside the cave, fearing the people in the village. This unexpected discovery helps to break the patterns of expectations and offer new possibilities of existence and experience. In this sense, children's literature can be a source for hope, so necessary in times of crisis as we all experience. Children, adults, Arabs, Jews, privileged and unprivileged societies. Before I end, I would like to credit and give credit to my wonderful and talented many award-winning illustrators, most of them considered the best in Hebrew Israeli children's literature, Rutu Modan, Avigail Meyer, Ora Eyal, Christina Kadmon, Masha Manapov, Michal Tzuri, and Shirley Weissman. Thank you.